Thank you for being here. It's really intense at COP. This is my first COP. Had all of you been at COP before? Were you expecting this level of intensity? Yeah. I'm like an LA girl. My work is focused on my own community. I'm not like a global traveler. Uh, and so I'm going to stand up. All right. So it's intense. But we're going to focus today a little bit on some very specific nexus of issues that I think are common in a lot of places, but we're going to start in a particular place. Starting in Los Angeles, where I live. So how many of you have been to Los Angeles? Okay. So y'all know, right? We have an amazing amount of diversity, an amazing amount of income diversity, an amazing amount of disparities in wealth. We have people who are struggling to make ends meet and people who live in mansions, and we have everything in between. But we also are a city that is fairly built out, despite the fact that we have not made it particularly easy to build housing, affordable, accessible housing. So we've been working in this city in a lot of different ways for a long time, and started to do some research, and I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and how Arup came to be doing this research. And I guess I should start there, right? I'm Heather Rosenberg. I work with Arup. I lead the resilience practice, and specifically the Resilience, Impact, and Social Equity group, RISE, for the Americas. And I'm able to do that because Arup is an employee-owned, mission-driven engineering and consulting firm focused on sustainable development. And so I am given a lot of space and freedom to do work that might not otherwise be the kind of, typical consulting work that you might see. And one of my colleagues actually did a lot of research looking at building decarbonization, some internally funded, self-funded research on how do you actually decarbonize buildings, and how do we actually meet California climate targets in this very complicated city. And there was a lot of energy modeling and impact, cost impact assessments and all kinds of other things, looking at phasing over time and equipment life and all sorts of other dimensions. And out of that work, NRDC actually approached us and said, well, that's great, but what does that mean for affordable housing? LA is a city with very little subsidized or public housing. We have no real concept of social housing. We have very little social safety net. We have a housing crisis. We have a growing population of unhoused people, and all of the challenges associated with that. So what does this really mean for affordable housing? And what was started as an energy project really became a housing project. And the first thing we have to understand is, well, what is affordable housing in LA? What do we mean by affordable? Who lives in affordable housing? What does it look like? And what we found pretty quickly was this is an entire sector of our community that is in crisis. Following particularly the COVID pandemic, the number of people who were displaced, the number of people, I think more than half of the people who live in Los Angeles are behind on either rent or utilities, according to a recent US Census poll. So we have people who don't have a lot of other options. They don't have a lot of places to go if their housing costs increased. At the same time, we have buildings in disrepair. All of the structures around how affordable housing is financed make it extremely difficult to get any funding to do things. The models are, especially on the corporate side, fairly extractive. You have complicated capital stacks. You have all of these different issues that make it very difficult to retrofit buildings. But we can't meet our decarbonization goals without retrofitting buildings. We have buildings that are very difficult to retrofit because of all of the level of deferred maintenance going on there, and issues of mold and asbestos and failing roofs and all kinds of things like that. So at the same time that we were examining that for NRDC, SCE, SoCal Edison, came to us and said, what does electrification mean from a resilience perspective? And I'm a resilience person. When I hear resilience, I think community resilience, organizational resilience. My colleagues think of more physical, technical resilience in terms of hazards and risks and those sorts of things. And so we looked really comprehensively at, well, what do we mean by resilience, and what happens when you, remove the redundancy of having natural gas from your stove or things like that in an earthquake, or what does any of this mean for medically vulnerable populations? And there's a really strong overlap between who is vulnerable to a power outage, who is vulnerable to retrofits and the cost increase that can be passed on to renters. And so what we really realized was, this is not something that we're going to design a program. We're going to write a policy and fix everything. We need to look at an ecosystem-based approach. We need to understand equity, resilience, and decarbonization as interlinked goals, and how do we solve for all of them at the same time? Because if we solve for only one at a time, we will make things worse. So that's what we're really here to talk about today, is this ecosystem approach of bringing different kinds of strategies together in new and creative processes. We can't repeat the way we've been doing things because clearly they don't work. So I'm so excited to have this panel here to talk with us today. These are rock stars. You may not know them yet, but you will. I have a panel of rock stars. We had our wish list of who would come and talk with us about this, and they all said yes. So I'm a little bit starstruck. But I'll just go through the list. I'll start on the end with Doug Sims. Is the Senior Director of Resilient Communities Division at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And not going to read any of their bios because that would be the whole session. But I will say he has helped either found or lead all kinds of things that are really highly relevant to this work, particularly the NRDC Finance Center, the NRDC's Environment, Equity, and Justice Center, the New York Green Bank, and the Green Bank Network. So all of those are really relevant. Next we have Carolyn Choi. She is the VP of Corporate Affairs at SoCal Edison and at Edison International. She's in charge of a crazy portfolio of all kinds of things that include communications, government relations, public affairs, philanthropy, you name it. She's got a lot on your plate. And a long list of credentials and participation on boards around community engagement and working with nonprofits and really understanding this energy landscape in a deep way. Next we have Darwin Musavi, who is the Deputy Secretary for Energy Policy and Housing Coordination at the Cal State Transportation Authority, CalSTA. He's been appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom and has a long career working in state government at the nexus of a lot of these different issues between transportation, housing, decarbonization, really kind of a holistic look at how do we solve these complex problems. And finally, we have Shalanda Baker. She is a Senate-confirmed Biden appointee, Director for Energy Justice in the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. How cool of a title is that? And she's the author, I'm a new fan, of Revolutionary Power. You should get this book. You should read it. It's really good. An Activist Guide to Energy Transition. So really a great resource. She does a lot of other things too, like leads the Justice 40 initiative at the Department of Energy and all kinds of other things. So you see, I have rock stars, right? So what we're going to do, let's just have each of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation, and then at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. So okay, start here.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. It is such a busy COP, and I know that There's so much going on. You could be in a lot of different places, so it's great to be here and be in conversation with you all about equity, about justice, about the sort of gnarly mix of issues that we have when we think about decarbonization, when we think about deep decarbonization. How do we make sure that that is just? I want to, I think, spend 3 minutes kind of teeing up a longer conversation about a few things. First, I want to talk about energy justice and what it is, because I think people are throwing that term around a lot, and I just want to be very clear about what it is, where it comes from. I also want to talk about Justice 40, again, top lines, because we can double click and do a deep dive on any of that. And then I want to talk about some of our challenges right now on the federal side. So as Heather mentioned, I'm Shalanda Baker. I lead the Justice 40 initiative at the Department of Energy. Justice 40, again, is something that is transforming our government. It's transforming the way we think about decarbonization. But it's rooted in energy justice. So all over the United States and actually all over the world, people are paying exorbitant amounts for energy. It's leading to, you know, folks making difficult decisions about whether to heat their homes or to eat. I mean, this is a heat or eat conundrum. Normally, 6% of overall household income is, you know, a reasonable amount of your overall income to spend on energy. In the United States, we know that there are households in places like the Deep South, in parts of LA, all over the country, where households are paying 10, 20, and sometimes 30%, $1 in $3 that comes through the door to meet their energy needs. We also know from research that has been conducted by the Department of Energy, the department that I'm a part of, that 1 in 3 households experiences energy insecurity. That's receiving a disconnection notice, that's getting disconnected, and it's, again, making the difficult decision of whether to heat your home or eat. So this is a big problem, and this is really why we think about how we can decarbonize our economy, how we can move toward clean energy resources without raising the cost, right? Without raising the cost for so many homes that experience energy insecurity and energy injustice. There's also the range of injustices that communities face. A lot of our environmental justice communities, I can think about pockets of LA where folks are looking at smokestacks, where kids are playing, you know, basketball in the front of oil and gas infrastructure. That's a part of the energy injustice and broader picture as well, that sort of disproportionate impact of our energy system on certain communities. So that led our president, the president that I serve, President Biden, to issue the Justice 40 initiative on day 7 of this administration. And on day 7, he said, we're going to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad. This was Executive Order 14008. He said, I'm going to tackle the climate crisis, but also I'm going to embed in that tackling process equity. And so he established Justice 40, which is the promise that 40% of the benefits of all of our climate and clean energy spending, 40% of that spending, or of the benefits of that spending, has to go to frontline, marginalized communities, and those are the households that I just described. That's historic. It's never been done before. We are hoping that we create a framework that can then be replicated all over the world, because we know that the communities that have been excluded from processes, indigenous communities, low-income folks in different developing countries, have always been excluded from processes. And we want to lead by example and showing how we can do it differently in the United States. And so my challenges, we have now created a transformative framework at the Department of Energy, an agency that for the last 50 years has been committed to R&D, so research and development, lots of scientists, lots of engineers, but we have created a framework to implement Justice 40 by saying that every single funding application that goes out the door now has a point system where every applicant must show how it's going to deliver community benefits. So the community benefits plans that are now transformative, now required in every single application, count stakeholder engagement, count benefits to communities, count diversity, equity, inclusion. So how are they going to contract with diverse suppliers? How are they going to reach out to community colleges, technical colleges, minority serving institutions? And then fourth, how are they going to create a great workforce, a labor union, a union-driven labor workforce that is a part of it? Again, hiring, returning citizens, et cetera. It's never been done before at the Department of Energy, and every single application that comes out of the door, and comes into our door, has to include that. So my challenge is making sure that the world is ready for this. Is the world ready for Justice 40? Is the world, meaning the world that we serve in the U.S., is it ready to put together plans that are able to facilitate that transformative type of work. And we are now building the ecosystem, building the communities, working with local and state leaders to make sure that they are ready for this moment.
Awesome, thank you. It's a really good summary. Darwin?
Thank you. Thanks again for having me here today. I'm Darwin Musavi. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination at the California State Transportation Agency. I know that's a mouthful. There's a lot of buzzwords in there, but I think the reason I say my title and get all those words out there is that they're actually really critical to why I'm here and the angle that I come at the work. It is not by mistake that there is a deputy with the word environment and housing at the transportation agency. In this administration in particular, there's been a huge focus in California on what we call both a climate crisis but also a housing crisis at the same time. Given the issues that were described of lack of affordability in California, the nexus of those two in my mind and the work that I do is actually transportation and transportation emissions. One of the largest contributors to our climate emissions in California, 50% of them come from the transportation sector. That transportation sector emissions have been increasing even while we've been getting more fuel efficient cars. We have ZEV adoption goals that are nation leading, 2035 zero emission vehicle sales, 100% zero emission vehicle sales for light duty vehicles by 2035, and 2045 100% for heavy duty and off-road vehicles. But even with those numbers, we're seeing the need for a reduction on our dependence in driving. And what that means, and the reason that's relevant here, is that the affordability crisis, the housing crisis, is one of the major drivers of driving. As people have to drive farther to qualify for housing, drive farther from their jobs, from economic hubs and centers in our state. LA being a great example of this. That affordability crisis is driving emissions, leading to inequities, I think there's a whole loop of things we can explore there. And so I think where I come at this work, I've spent a lot of time working on affordable housing programs and transportation programs, particularly on the affordable housing side. New development, not necessarily retrofits, but there's a huge opportunity with the governor having a goal for 2.5 million units to think about how those units meet all of our objectives at the same time. I think that's from a housing developer's perspective, oftentimes headache-inducing to hear, but I think it's what's necessary to be able to deliver on all of our goals. We can't build housing for the sake of it. We have to build it in the right places and make sure that it's decarbonized while we do it. So happy to talk more about all those different aspects and how they interrelate, but yeah, happy to be here.
It is working? Oh, there it is. Okay.
Is this on? Yes, okay. Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Choi with Southern California Edison and Edison International. It's really a pleasure to be here and truly to talk about resilience, because this pathways to 1.5, much of it, the conversation is around mitigation and how we're really going to try and avoid getting the temperature to rise above 1.5. At the same time, we are seeing across the globe, and certainly at home in the United States and for me in California, the impacts of climate change today, and how do we build resilience into our communities, into our infrastructure, and into our design work. And so it's really a great timely panel to have this conversation, and it's really a pleasure to be here today. So I think for us, Southern California Edison is one of the larger electricity producers in the country, service providers in the country. We serve about 15 million customers across Southern California, about 40% of the state of California. Many of you know California has the 5th largest economy in the world, so it's a significant presence we have. It has one of the most diverse populations as well. And you talked earlier on, Heather, just about the impact of income. About 30% of our customers are on an income qualified rate. So they are making the decisions, Heather, around payments of bills and other things. So as we think about how we're going to address climate change, one of the things that we really want to make sure we talk about are certainly the opportunities to leverage clean energy in more aspects of the economy, like buildings, which we're going to get to, and transportation, but also thinking about the larger energy share of wallet, because while electricity growth is going to occur and bills may increase as a result of that, the analysis that we've done, and we'll talk more about that, shows that the energy share of wallet will actually decrease because we're not going to be spending money on gasoline and natural gas as we move towards this clean energy transition. And how do we do that in a cost-effective way is going to be really important. We recognize that electricity as an essential service is something that people can't live without. We hear it all the time when the power does go out. And if more aspects of the economy are going to be reliant on that electricity, we really need to make sure that we're doing it in a planful way, in a way that's in coordination with our state and local and federal partners and with our communities as well. So look forward to talking more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Doug Sims. I'm with an NGO called Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. And we're a US-based organization that has activities also in China and India. So we work really trying to, we have government, we have the private sector, we have utilities here. We're trying to influence all those actors and tie it all together and make change on the ground. So that's kind of what we do at the international, national, state, and local scale. And so my particular group is called Resilient Communities. And it's a group that was formed similar to Darwin's thinking, in that we have to stop siloing our efforts to think about transportation, energy, buildings. These are all things which need to be integrated in a single way of thinking. We also need to be thinking about not just those sectors, but places. So we have a team which is focused on buildings, transport, and energy. We also have a team which is focused on regions, Northeast, Southeast, West, and Midwest. And it's important also to center equity. So we have an equity networks and partnership team. And why do we do this? Because we worked for many years in these silos, and we were not actually seeing the whole picture. So a big part of what we've done in the last, I think, probably 3 to 4 years is set ourselves up for success. So we're able to ladder up and ladder down from state, local, federal, center equity, but also have the technical expertise and the movement building teams to understand different conditions on the ground. So in the case of this really important issue of building decarbonization, those teams are looking at it from these perspectives. And I think also in that team is the Green Finance Center, because ultimately, if you have all the policy in the world, if you can't actually find a way to pay for it that's affordable, you won't get it done. So that's how we approach this work. Going back to what Shalanda was saying, the important thing also is to ensure that we are leading with climate justice and equity. And so one thing that we've done is to, when we propose a policy, say for a building code in Los Angeles, we used to do it looking at, okay, well, what's the technology that's out there? How do we get it out to the market in a way that we can drive down the cost of that technology? And we didn't really think about how that impacts communities. We didn't think about the impacts of people in affordable housing, people in churches and community facilities. It was really about just getting technology out, and the market will solve the problem. Well, that won't really work. The market won't solve the problem. And so a lot of the data, which I think you guys are going to be sharing today, and we've done our own analysis, is that we cannot decarbonize affordable housing unless we have significant subsidies and incentives to do so. But we have to target those in the right way. And so I think when we can look at this space, bringing together this equity-centered approach, uniqueness of places, and the particular opportunities for technologies in this sector, we can drive change, I think, at a significant scale, particularly since we have a massive opportunity with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act. Now, those don't focus on housing. There's enough in there that we can do a lot to really bring those incentives to bear in this market.
So much good stuff in all of that, and I think we'll pull on a few different threads here, kind of one at a time. I think, first of all, let's talk about this. I want to acknowledge the importance of place that you just mentioned, the importance of a place-based approach.
I'm leaving on Tuesday, I think.
Because here at COP,
Yeah.
you know, we're focused on this global.
Okay.
Can you hear? Okay. This global approach, or this this need for. Wow.
I mean, it's great, right? And the payoff is amazing. Diplomatic way of saying it.
That wasn't me. It was nice and crystal clear. That was like the end of Thriller, right? You know, that was really surreal. I didn't even think of it as showing my age, which might be really showing my age. The end of Thriller, which I know by heart, but I will not do for you. We are getting back on track here. This notion of a place-based approach, the notion of a place-based approach at scale, right? So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the methodology of how you do a place-based approach in a replicable way. And I want to, first of all, center that thinking around the people who are not here, the people who are not having this conversation with us, the renters who are making these decisions about how to spend their very limited resource. And I also want to acknowledge the session I was at before this was at the climate justice group, hearing from global activists around the world who were talking about really serious challenges in their communities about what happens when your land is being polluted by the oil and gas companies that are also the major employers that control the government and the military and all sorts of other things. And so I think there's a scale of severity of these issues, and we are talking about Los Angeles here, which is a rich city in a rich country with a very progressive government. But at the end of the day, we still are having a lot of these challenges, and we can't discount the challenges that are happening for real people living in tent communities, a lot of them, or living in the fear of ending up in a tent community in substandard housing. So understanding a little bit about that context and anchoring this in honoring the people who are not here. How do we sort of lift those voices and think about a place-based approach? And I'll start with Doug, because I know you're working around the world on this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Hello? Okay. I think a place-based approach means, first and foremost, having people that understand the place at the center of whatever you're trying to do. And that includes the community groups, that includes local government, that includes the private sector, that includes civil society more broadly, and really focusing on, what are the needs of those different groups, where do they conflict, where can they work together. And so we try to actually bring those groups together. That's true if you're working in India or working in Los Angeles, that's sort of the first step to working in a place-based approach. But at the same time, I think you can't be on an island by yourself in your place. There's lessons to be learned by other places. So it's really important to have that networked effect and peer learning to allow different groups to be able to connect. And we try to facilitate those connections by creating networks of groups or connecting networks of networks. That's really important. There's work that's going on, for example, in LA, also in Berkeley on the same issue. There's work going on in Boston and Chicago and in other places. So how do we make sure that, yes, certain things are going to be different, but many things are going to be the same? So what's going to be different? Technologies will be different. If you're talking about a cold environment like the Northeast, the set of technologies that are going to be applicable will be a little bit different than working in Los Angeles, right? Some of the costs and requirements for the building envelope are going to be different in places like that. But at the same time, there's still a need to protect renters from cost increases, to understand the financing structures. Those are going to be the same, very similar. Another important element in the U.S. and other places is what's the availability of policy in the places. So if you're trying to work, again, in California, that's one set of very supportive policies. But even in California, it's extremely challenging to work in this space. There's not enough policy. But if you're in the Southeast, if you're in Florida, if you're in Louisiana, Mississippi, it's much harder. You have to really go dig deeper and work, with the federal monies available in those programs. You have to work with the local mission-driven developers and lenders who can work in these places and communities. So I think that's the key. That's sort of the fundamental ingredients to the place-based approach, and being able to connect from the state, local, federal, governmental level, and look between the local and national private sector.
That's great. Darwin, you want to build on that?
All right. Can you hear me okay? All right. Yeah, just wanted to build off what Doug was saying. I think in terms of looking at a place-based approach that's also kind of multi-objective, there's this All right. Okay. Hopefully this mic can get all of us through. Let's see. We're gonna be huddling up here soon on this one mic, but all right. Don't let us down, Mike. All right. So what I was saying is, I think there are some specific programs I wanted to highlight that we have in California, and the federal government now has through IIJ and IRA similar type programs, but I think there's this push and pull and this balance to find between, to Doug's point, creating a set of policies or structure that are replicatable, that people can learn from place to place, and then creating room for that ground up work. So in particular, the Transformative Climate Communities program at the California Strategic Growth Council, and then also the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program at SGC as well are two key programs that focus on specific place and are very much community driven, and center the needs of people, but then provide a framework of policies in terms of collective goals like the ones we've been talking about here, that need to be met for funding. And it creates this this competition, frankly, amongst locals to come together and solve these big issues, but in a way that is very much driven by the community. And I think that model is starting to be replicated in different places, and is, I think, a key pathway to meeting a lot of our goals. The challenge there, and this gets to what Doug was raising, is scale and funding. Obviously, this is so far we've learned how to do this with limited resources in specific places and have a great kind of I think set of pilots, if you will, of what can be done, but bringing that to scale is going to take all kinds of other funding sources, public and private partnerships, to really bring that to fruition.
Oh, okay, thanks, Caroline. Okay. So I want to take a different tack here. I mean, we've been talking a lot about community partnerships, community organizations, specific communities as a place-based approach, but I also want to bring up the importance of data. So when you look at decarbonization models, I mean, the focus of this panel is mainly on buildings, but a lot of stuff, transportation, et cetera. But when you look at decarbonization models, deep decarbonization models, they are blunt instruments. So they talk about building stock writ large. They talk about the grid writ large. They don't talk about places. And so I'm just going to put a plug out there for all the scholars, all the academics who are interested in this space. We need better models. We need better models that actually are narrowly focused on the dimensions of communities. It means that we tag things differently, right? In our analysis, in our models, the ones and zeros that we're putting into models need to say, is there community capacity for this? Was there a history of redlining in this community? Is that, I mean, because that impacts how you approach decarbonization, something that we at the Department of Energy and on my team are really focused on, but we need other scholars to contribute to broader models so that we understand the places where we're bringing money. I also want to, so the Department of Energy, we also have competitive grants. I mean, that's the way we do things. That's what Congress has often, mandated that we do. But some of the things we hear from communities are, we don't want to participate in a Hunger Games for how we can improve our communities. We're not going to do the equity Hunger Games. And so what that means is we need to be thinking about ways where there's a baseline, right? Sort of a modicum of justice and equity everywhere. And we know that there isn't enough funding for that. But what is the basic framework of decency when we're talking about energy access, when we're talking about access to electric vehicles, when we're talking about clean and healthy air and water, right? Communities should not have to compete to make their communities healthy and safe. I mean, we should be competing for the really cool and sexy stuff, right? Like, how do we create model communities around decarbonization? And so I'm just pushing back because that's some of the feedback that we get from the Department of Energy. When we go out to communities, we're not going to compete. So I've talked about data, I've talked about the Hunger Games, and then I want to actually talk about the places we know about, especially in the United States. So we don't need to do fancy models to understand what communities have been harmed. You can look at the Gulf Coast region of the United States. I mean, they've got holes poked in every single part of their Gulf, right? They are Cancer Alley, where there are high cancer rates, where people still can't afford energy, but yet they're bearing the burdens of the energy system. This is environmental justice. This is where Dr. Robert Bullard got his start, looking at Houston communities, looking at black communities that historically have borne the burdens of the energy system. So we don't have to run models to know that that community, that set of communities in the southeast region of the United States, the Gulf Coast region, will need extra attention. That's recognition justice. So every place has communities that have historically borne burdens. The communities in LA, we know where they are, right? We know who those communities are. And so we need special high-touch assistance in those places. We need more resources in those places. Again, avoiding the Hunger Games sort of scenario so that they can actually be a part of the decarbonization effort.
Totally agree, and I think one of the things we need to focus on is, so at the utility level, I think we have some of that data. We do know where our lower income communities are. We know what the system is doing in those areas. We know the condition of the system in those areas. So as we think about the future and as we think about that transition to a clean energy economy, where are we going to be investing in our systems to make sure that all of our communities are moving forward and embracing that clean energy economy and are not being left behind. One of the things is just in today's regulatory structure, if they're not adopting those technologies, then they're burdened with the costs of the system that becomes increasingly outdated. So we want to make sure they're able to adopt those technologies as they become available, whether that's clean vehicles or electrification of appliances, lighting, et cetera. And so we know where those folks are, we have our customer data, so we can help with that. And I think you talked about, Doug, the ability to communicate with those communities. So again, Southern California has one of the most diverse communities in the country. How we are able to communicate with them and make sure they're aware of the availability of programs that the utility offers, programs that the state offers, programs that the federal government offers, and that are available at the local level. We have to work in partnership to make sure that that happens. People are inundated with information, and when you're struggling to make ends meet, some of that doesn't penetrate, even though that's the information that can help make your life a little easier and help reduce your costs. So we have to focus on how do we get to those community-based organizations, doing it in language so that they are able to take advantage of the programs that we offer today.
Is this going to work or is this going to be insane? Okay, and just not turning into Michael Jackson. So I want to just take a quick minute, and talk about resilience, because so much of the conversation around decarbonization can focus on, it's really a climate mitigation strategy, right? It is absolutely a strategy that we must do to meet our climate targets for all of our sake, right? It's why we're all here at COP. It's also, from a resilience lens, a force of disruption. So when you start to intervene potentially in buildings where people are already on the margins, you're creating a change, and if those costs of those changes are passed on to particularly tenants or to to others that can't afford those first costs, you are actually doing some of the same kinds of things that fires and hurricanes might do, of driving people out of their homes. So how do we look at this as through a resilience lens? And part of the potential of using that framing is then we can anticipate change, try and design for preventing unintended consequences and maximizing co-benefits. That's super jargony way of just saying, like, how do we take this moment of change and really make sure that the communities who are on the front lines of climate change are benefiting. So yeah, let's have Carolyn start. And then.
Well, I think one is, as I was talking about, really the communication into those customers, and we differentiate those customers so we can direct target specific programs to them. I think the other is to do it in the language that they are most comfortable. So we offer most of our programs in 7 languages. Our customer call center is in multiple languages beyond that even. And so able to address the concerns that the communities have. Our philanthropic efforts are focused in on community-based organizations that are the trusted partners to many of those people. Utilities are often aligned with government. Government is often mistrusted, especially for folks who may not be naturalized citizens, and they are worried about immigration, particularly during the last administration. And so really working with the community-based organizations that are trusted advisors to them, that they can then convey that information to them in a way that they will accept and appreciate, and they can sign them up for our program. So we do a lot through third parties, actually, to make sure that the information is getting out there to others.
I just want to say, I think the affordability question is the question. I mean, this is the dilemma, right? Like, this is one of the hardest parts of decarbonization, so that we don't leave folks behind, right? We absolutely don't want to lead to gentrification by improving communities. We don't want to lead to that displacement that we know is already happening in some communities that become green, that become sustainable. So it is absolutely the hardest question. You're asking it as if it's not. But I mean, I know lots of folks here have been thinking about it. So I want to talk about 2 things that we have been doing at the Department of Energy and in the U.S. federal government to address these issues. One, policy supports. So we now have transformative climate legislation for the first time in history in the United States. So we have the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which happened about a year ago, and then, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act. No piece of legislation is perfect, and we've heard from communities that they're concerned about some of the things that Congress has asked us to support and fund. However, we know that for the first time ever, we have the ability to move huge amounts of resources into communities focused on decarbonization, and with Justice 40 as the lens, as the filter through which all of that money has to flow. We now know that disadvantaged communities, frontline communities, are going to be prioritized as we spend that money. Now, the devil's in the details. The devil's in the details, and the second thing that I'll say that we're doing is, at DOE, and I mentioned this before, we have set up a framework on community benefits. So community benefits plans now have to be a part of every single application. And what that means is that American taxpayers are actually going to be benefited. Because people like my mom, who pay taxes, but who can't qualify for any assistance to
bring down her energy bill because she makes too much money, but it still creates problems for her on a month-to-month basis. People like my mom are actually going to start to win. When we got the bipartisan infrastructure law, when we got IRA, my mom was like, yes, but does any money come to the communities? I'm like, Mom, like, I'm working on it. But, you know, like, that skepticism, that cynicism, I mean, we are in a position to change lives. We're in a position to sort of lay a foundation. I'm not naive enough to think that I'm going to do it in the next 2 years, in the next 6 years. We are chipping away at a system that took 400 years to build. We're chipping away at a system that took 400 years to build. And so as we dismantle that structural inequality, that structural racism that has informed government policy, it's informed government policy. As we dismantle that, we're creating more and more opportunities for communities to play. I think it's amazing to sort of think about what the baseline should be for a household, right? What are sort of the bare minimums in terms of energy access, energy reliability. But the really cool thing that I'm focused on, I'm really interested in, is how do we create wealth as well? We know that more money in the pocket every month is going to create some wealth, but how do we get businesses born and raised in those communities to be a part of this transition? So energy efficient companies, right? Companies that are doing services in communities. They know where auntie lives. They know where grandma lives. They know where everyone is in those communities. So they're going to be able to do that decarbonization. They're going to be able to close the envelope, which is the big problem with housing stock. So we need to really seed those new businesses. I'm working on that at the Department of Energy through our minority business division in my office. But that, I think, is going to be the key to really making this lasting, where we have all the wealth, right? Lots of wealth created in the communities that need the most help.
So, thank you. That's great. I think I agree with you. I mean, of course, it's about affordability, right? And we need to get that funding there. But right now, there's a lot of other barriers happening too, right? And there are people, first of all, who will say, well, we need to decarbonize quickly at all costs, so exclude affordable housing, give them an exemption, and just move forward with other buildings. But we know that there's resilience from these measures as well, right? Particularly in Los Angeles, the ability to use cooling from a heat pump that does heating and cooling, and people will have air conditioning that they never would, but then we'll have additional costs, right? So we're trying to think about how, and part of the challenge, I think, is that many existing programs are not accessible, so that there's money there. There's a lot of money. There's big money out there. And then there's this building. And so, Doug, can you talk a little bit about the financing tools and how you get from big money to small project in a way that sets communities up to build that wealth and to be more equitable and to implement these kinds of things?
Okay. Yeah, got it. Sure. I think just on the wealth building side, I think, wealth building is decreasing costs, increasing income, and building an asset value. And so, and also decreasing debt. So I think those need to be factored in to think about how can we achieve those things. And, in the place-based approach we talked about earlier, it's important to look at the local housing stock and where these people live, what kind of, is it multifamily? Is it single family? Is it, 4 units? Is it 60? These are all different conditions, which require different kinds of tools and different kinds of interventions for financing. I think just some of the barriers that we're seeing, though, is a lot of these affordable housing properties need a lot of basic upgrades and repairs before the energy improvements can be made. That's the problem, both because the improvements actually aren't right-sized when you do them because they're inefficient, and also because some of the programs require energy savings, but some of these investments don't generate energy. They just generate, no mold, or they generate better air quality, not necessarily energy savings in every case. So in terms of the programs that we have, we need to sort of de-silo the programs that are for housing improvements and those for energy, because the money needs to go for the whole entire thing, not just those things. And so I think if you're a lender trying to, or if we have something called the Community Development Financial Institution, which are mission-driven lenders try to work in this space, but they don't really, certain pots of money they can use for for energy, certain for, so we have to get rid of that because if you go into a building and do everything at once, it's much more cost effective. So that's the first thing, like, can we do everything at once? The health and safety improvements, the energy efficiency, electrification, or can we phase it in a way that makes sense? Also, these buildings just generally don't, if you're a multifamily, they don't generate a lot of income. They can't really, they don't have extra money to do stuff. They don't have people to manage the property. So we do have to really subsidize a lot of these. Again, the market won't be able to do this by itself. There are a lot of promising efforts to look at this. I think, I think LA has a lot of thoughts coming out of this, your work. Other cities, like we work in Berkeley, they're looking at having an intentional effort to coordinate these streams of funding differently. They're looking at how do we ensure that the money that we do have is prioritizing the right households. So one way to do that is through census tracts, but there are also people who actually don't live in those tracts but also need help. So we have to target the data to reach those people that are not in those census tracts. How do we do strategic grant applications more strategically, matching them up, different ones for housing and for energy? How do we look at that to sandwich those? How can we raise funds, maybe with other cities or through dedicated taxes, like in Denver, who has a climate protection fund, to actually subsidize the most needy communities? I think reform utility programs as well. Some of those programs, on-bill financing doesn't always work for these kinds of properties. So how do we work with utilities to make sure that their programs really line up with this kind of initiative? And I think just overall, in terms of the funding side, making funding more flexible. It can be used for different purposes. Okay, we're gonna go in and do these things, and have that sort of be part of the whole package. The last thing I'll say is there are promising financial products that are being developed to do this, where say you have a list of say 50 improvements that include health and safety, that include electrification, and you can have a menu. Okay, you need this, and those are all pre-approved by lenders and pre-approved by different governmental programs for subsidies, and you roll that out in a very, very standardized way, because particularly for these smaller projects, they can't be efficiently financed one by one. They've got to be aggregated and sort of standardized, but you can't super standardize because then it's too rigid. So this menu approach really helps drive holistic building investments.
I'd just add to that, I think Doug's point about flexibility is really key here. We are, 8 years away, actually 7 years and 2 months away from a really aggressive 2030 target and really ambitious 2045 target. And the need to act with urgency is significant. Government programs are not known for flexibility. And neither are utility programs, to be fair, which are approved by government, And so we look at these programs today, and many of them are just, I wouldn't say many, but some of them are outdated. And to change the program takes so long to get it to be available and where it needs to be. I look at energy efficiency, where we focus today, continue to focus on getting above code. But code, at least in California, is really excellent. And we have, 70% of today's building stock will be in place in 2050. So getting to code would be a great accomplishment. So should utility energy efficiency dollars, instead of being used to give customers beyond code, get them to code? Because the significant energy savings, the significant emission savings, the significant clean air benefits that go along with that. And as you're doing the energy efficiency, yes, decarbonizing and putting in electrification at the same time, so then you get the benefits of direct air emissions inside the building envelope on top of the energy efficiency savings. So those are the types of things. You look at net energy metering, it's been around for 25 years. The Commission's looking at that today. It really needs to be something that's more rapid, but then the Commission or other governmental agencies can move more rapidly. At the same time, not excluding stakeholder engagement, because you need those voices coming in from the community to tell their stories. At the same time, we just need to act with more speed.
Darwin, do you want to jump in on that? Is this in your wheelhouse, or are you good? Are you sure? Okay. Oh, my mind is sort of running around and racing as I hear these two comments, and as I sort of think about our commitments socially, right, as a society, who sort of owns the duty of getting those houses up to code, and also weatherization ready, which is a challenge that we run into again and again at the Department of Energy through our weatherization assistance program. So again, the sort of question is, who holds the duty? Who holds the duty? Is it the state? Is it your local government? Is it your utility? Is it your local housing authority? I mean, I think that's a question we actually need to grapple with. Because right now the risks, the costs are being spread across all of these different types of stakeholders. We're thinking about creative financing mechanisms that actually put the burden on the homeowner or resident essentially to fix the problem. But again, these problems didn't come out of whole cloth, right? These are structural problems that people were born into. And so I think we need to grapple with the duty question, and then design policies around that. And obviously we have a lot more policy supports, especially at the federal level, to do that. We got $3.5 billion for weatherization, an additional 3.5 through the bipartisan infrastructure law. But what I know from my work in Massachusetts before joining the administration is that the households that are ready still are not finding out about these programs, right? Like they're still not getting the knock on the door. They're still not able to avail themselves of these programs. So we absolutely need a ground game. I think we need community ambassadors, liaisons. We need folks who are from those communities going door to door. We need churches to become a part of this, houses of worship. I think we need to be creative, because if we don't fix this problem, those communities are absolutely going to get left behind. They're absolutely going to get left behind. No electric vehicles, no rooftop solar, none of this stuff on resilience is going to come to them, because their houses are filled with holes. Their walls, air is going through. The energy use intensity is so high in those communities. And again, it's not accidental. I mean, this is a result of a structural problem. So who owes the duty so that these folks can participate?
You want to comment on?
One quick comment on that. In terms of your point on whose responsibility is it, I think this is where the importance of technical assistance and capacity building comes in, because there isn't one entity that's taking responsibility across any of this work. So where you can fill in the gaps by lifting folks up who are willing to do the work and able to do the work, where others may not be acting in that space or not taking the responsibility they should. I mean, I think that is like one of the best angles in an argument for why that type of work is really important.
I think that's a great point. I mean, one of the things that we have been doing through this work is systems mapping, because this is not just an energy problem and then over here's a housing problem and over here's a transportation problem. It is a whole nexus of problems. And so by doing the systems mapping and saying who is responsible now for what programs exist, what is the system, where are the leverage points in the system, who has control over those leverage points, and often it's multiple groups. So suddenly we need the utilities to be working with the housing department in a new way. We can be designing policies that have, in exchange for, receiving subsidies, you make commitments around affordable housing and leveraging the dollars to have commitments, other things like that. So that systems mapping and bringing everything together, and then creating partnerships across your organizations and many others, and then working with those community-based organizations to be the trusted partner to deliver it. And we haven't even gotten to things like one-stop shops and aggregators and accelerators and all of these other kinds of things. But so what I want to do now, we've set up for a 90-minute session. We gave ourselves 60 minutes to talk and content. I want to ask each of you just to really quickly list, if you have one or two or three, check out this policy, just things to Google. This policy in this place, this program, this example, this report, anything that, a resource that you have, the New York State one that's in your book, so you don't be stumped. And then Anyone from the audience has questions, we do have time for your questions.
Okay, quickly then, I will say thanks for the answer. The Climate Leadership Community Protection Act, it was a precursor to Justice 40 in New York, already allocated 40% of the benefits of their climate spending to frontline disadvantaged communities. We built on that in the federal government. So if you don't know about CLCPA, look it up. If you don't know about Justice 40, it's something that you should know about. I think it's transformative. I think it's going to change everything, but we have to implement.
I guess I'll do the California version of the same plug and talk about the California Climate Investments Programs and the CalEnviro Screen, which is our version, although not exact, of Justice 40. In particular, I just want to go back to your point about the Equity Hunger Games and the Transformative Climate Communities Program. I think, and that was kind of what I was alluding to with limited funding, that these programs can be great kind of incubators and pilots, and I think that is a tremendous program. I think its downfall cannot be that we don't have enough money, therefore people don't like it because it is a Hunger Games, because that is what it is right now. It's basically that program gets $60 million from the California state budget every year, and has to fight for that money every year, and puts out $20 million per project to 3 projects. My agency oversees $5 billion annually. So just in terms of scale, so I really do think at the end of the day, we have a lot of best practices. It's a matter of where's the money going.
Edison's done a lot of work to look at how California can best achieve its climate goals. So I would definitely encourage you to go to our website and look at our papers like Pathway to 2045, which lays out, we see as the most cost-effective way to reach California's really ambitious carbon neutrality goals, with 80 gigawatts of new zero-emission energy, 30 gigawatts of more energy storage, as well as 30 gigawatts of new generation behind the meter, so rooftop solar, mostly with like 50% of homes eventually having rooftop solar, and 10 gigawatts of energy storage. So things like that goes into transportation electrification and building electrification. We just did a paper last year called Mind the Gap that really talks about the gap between now and 2030, which is really an important milestone and one that we really must achieve to hit the 2045 target. I feel like and we are behind. California has done a fantastic job with about 1% emission reductions while achieving 3% growth, economic growth. So it's really a fantastic story. But to get to 2030 targets, we have to get 4% emission reduction year over year, starting last year, which we did not achieve. So we made a gap that we have to make up in the next few years. And so I think it's that kind of work and working with others that's really going to help make sure that California does achieve those goals.
I'm going to focus on some very unknown stuff. Maybe it's the financing side. There's a organization in Florida called the Solar Energy Loan Fund, and they're a CDFI, and they're also a green bank, and they have pioneered products which allow low-income property owners, single-family and owner-occupied small units to do just what I was describing earlier, a package of investments for energy, for accessibility, for aging in place, for health and safety, and for electrification, all in a way which doesn't impact your mortgage. It's an unsecured product. So really, working in communities which really typically can't get access to funding, they don't use credit scores. They use ability to pay metrics. So it's not about, you don't get shut out because you don't have a low high credit score. So I think that kind of program, and they have really no policy in Florida. So I think that kind of approach should be looked at, I think, in around the country. Another example of an institution doing something similar is, I'm on the board of this institution, but it's called Inclusive Prosperity Capital. And it's the first green bank focused on this sort of space. And they've done this sort of standardized products that blend grants and loans to drive down the cost of these improvements to communities, both for solar, energy efficiency, electrification. And they're working with low-income focused credit unions, who are also a really important player in this space in the U.S., to help people do appliances and other things in a similar way as the building envelope.
Amazing. So I want to open it up. Are there questions from the audience or examples of best practices that you would recommend we look at? Anybody? Yeah.
Hi, I'm. Oh, wow, that's so loud. Okay. Hi, I'm Mustafa with the Canadian delegation. I was wondering how could, like, there's multi-levels here, like, there's multi-levels here that, like, in the States and in Canada, the federal, provincial, and city level. So how, like, the vertical movement between these three levels can lead to, like, the justice, like climate justice within different neighborhoods or different interests, especially like when there's like different interests between a state and another state and so on. That's my question.
I mean, this is the hardest thing. I think, you know, I came into federal government as a lawyer, as a former law professor, really not really having my head around how dollars flowed through the federal government. And I think I have my head around that now after almost 2 years of service. I mean, we set the policy, right? We set the framework. We design the architecture through which the funds flow. We try to put as many sort of carrots and sticks in our frameworks to incentivize the right types of behavior. Some of it goes to private sector partners. Some of it goes to states through formula funds. And again, our hope and belief and wish is that they will use the template and the architecture that we have set up for them to do the right implementation. Now we hear from certain places, certain community members in certain states, that they don't believe that their governments are going to actually make sure those funds flow to them. And so now the strategy in the next 2 years of my time, at least, is to really get to the ground and to work with key stakeholders on the ground, to set the tables in unprecedented ways so that community members are actually talking to electeds, talking to members of the Department of Energy, and trying to make sure that that funding actually does flow. I mean, that's high-touch work. It's hard. That vertical that you talked about, I mean, it's so brilliant, such a great question. But it is one of the biggest challenges, I think, to making sure we get equity on the ground. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I can try to address that.
In the middle of the vertical.
I think,
In the middle of the vertical.
Go for it. Okay, I guess, yeah, we'll go down the vertical here. Just to add to that, and I think this is part of what, it's part of the complexity of the challenges. We have basically that exact same role again, right? To make sure, yeah, and with the added layer of, decision points on how to interpret what the feds are asking us to do, which is exactly, a lot of what you're talking about. You're hearing from communities, depending on what state you're in and what the politics and policies look like there. There certainly can be mistrust of how that's used, and we hear that again from local communities about, regional or local municipality governments the money's flowing to. So it is I think that illustrates the importance of actual meaningful partnership up and down that chain, and we have, to be frank, different levels of that depending on the different municipalities around the state and the different issues. But where those are the strongest is where you get the best implementation.
I think from our perspective, I think an important role for a group like NRDC is to be an intermediary between those levels of government, because sometimes there's things, for example, when the federal government is going to be, we push them to pass legislation that gets done. How do you design it so that it actually gets down to communities? How do you ensure the communities get their voice raised that high? We can facilitate that communication. We can influence program design to ensure that it suits the community level work. Similarly, cities, they don't actually always have access to the federal government in the way they'd like to. So one thing that we did, for example, is organize a mayor's letter to speak to the concerns of mayors around infrastructure legislation and try to get the mayors to talk directly to take them to D.C., talk to their representatives. But then once this is all in place, first of all, raise up the success stories. Like if someone in Cincinnati has a great example, it may not be known by other parts of even in Ohio or other states. So how do we make sure that how these programs are implemented and innovatively gets shared through peer learning networks, through materials? So I think it's laddering up from local to state and laddering down from federal to state to local.
I want to make one quick point.
Okay.
Go ahead. You can go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think at the end of the day, this transition is about the people. And we recognize that when you have this conflict sometimes between states, it's often because of the impact it's going to have on certain states. You know, we see that, the transition from coal to clean energy, you know, the move away from natural gas. It has a significant impact on some states more than others, whether that's people that are employed in those states, the taxes that are raised and generated in those states. And so this transition has to be planful and has to be one that does have government behind it to provide the dollars so that that transition can be done as seamlessly as possible. It will not be easy, absolutely, you know, and so the jobs that are going to be impacted, having the workforce development so those can do other work, maybe not in energy anymore, maybe in something else. We recognize that it is a significant shift of the economy as we move towards this clean energy future, and it is not an easy one, and it's certainly one that has to be done in coordination and collaboration because of the significant impact it's going to have.
One of the things we've been thinking about a lot with NRDC and with Enterprise Community Partners, which is an affordable housing group, and a lot of other groups, is to think about who can be the holders of fund aggregation. So, you know, there's funds from the DOE, and there's funds from the utilities, and there's funds from the state, and then there's philanthropic funds, and there's municipal funds, and there even could be private investment. And is there a way to drive, you know, use something like an ESG type funding, where we really need to carefully define what the heck is the S in ESG, where I don't even think we've touched that. But I think there's a real opportunity there. But is there a group, an aggregator of some kind? And there's nascent examples, I think, around. The DWP started one, and I think they thought this is much more going to take a lot more to invest in than we thought, so it's sort of on pause. I think Denver's moving in this direction, and Washington, D.C. So that at the end of the day, there are people who are working really hard to pull all of these money together and then make that transparent to the end user and say, you know, you need this kind of you want to do solar, you don't have the right roof, you've got asbestos in your attic, like, we're going to help you and give you the money and the technical assistance to do that. And you don't have to worry that this part's, you know, and your income qualified in this way, or you're, you know, meet these other, you know, criteria, or it's an affordable housing project, whatever it is, by location, by building type, by occupants, that we make that really easy and transparent, so that, first of all, the benefits can accrue in communities that have not been having them. Second of all, that tenants are not having their costs increase, so there's a real subsidy piece of this. That comes back to your question of who is, you know, responsible for this. And part of that, we're trying to, you know, do some of that economic analysis to say, what is the social benefit that is worth it to government to invest? This is a cost-effective benefit because there's health benefits, or there's keeping people housed, or other things like that, right? At the end of the day, you can capture those benefits, but it can be transparent to the end user and really simple, because if it's not simple, it doesn't get used. Do we have another question people want to ask, or anyone want to share each a final thought before your question? Sure. Is it a good question?
Well, thank you very much for pulling together such a fantastic panel. I'd like to follow up on this vertical because there was a piece of the vertical we didn't talk about, and that's the utility, the private sector. And I'm thinking about the work that Leah Stokes has done, sort of documenting the history of really powerful political persuasion that utilities have exerted in the wrong direction historically. And now we're seeing utilities like Southern California and Edison maybe come around and head in the other direction. What can we do as government, as NGOs, to turn utilities into these really progressive champions of all the things you're talking about? Utilities have been a little slow getting into the electric vehicle space. I imagine it's going to be harder to get them into the affordable housing space, but they could really play a powerful role if they were at the front of it as opposed to part of the chorus. Any thoughts on how we help you?
Well, I think our industry sees ourselves traditionally as the implementers of public policy. And when you talk to utility commissions, they often think of themselves as the implementers of public policy, and that it all starts at the governor and at the legislature. So that's a place to start because that is the public policy that generally is being implemented. If you want utilities to be active, which we are, I mean, I look at SCE as really an active utility that's trying to influence public policy in a direction towards the clean energy future that is fully aligned with where the state of California is going. I recognize that. It is harder. I came from a utility that the state was not as aggressive around climate change, and in talking about it to policymakers, it was a harder pitch to make because it was a cost. And how do you pull together government money along with utility money to make that transition affordable to customers? It's took a lot longer. One of the things we got was a renewable energy standard. Wasn't at the 100% that California is today, but it was a start. And California didn't start at 100, it started at 20. So I think once you start something, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Because 20 is a far cry from 100, but it was the beginning, and when you could see that progress could be made towards that and it was going to be achievable, before you even hit the target, you move the target because you saw the ability to that technology and pricing makes a difference too. At the same time that the target was set, which helped move the market, California absolutely, by being a first adopter, moved the market forward to drive the cost of solar and wind down so that other states could find it easier to adopt targets that now you see a lot of the renewables being at par with traditional generation or lower cost. And so I think it's having those conversations and in those companies, pushing that forward. They listen. It's customers also, right? So making sure it's customers that are bringing those messages forward that they want these programs from their utilities. Why don't my cousins in California that has their utility offers them a program. Why don't you offer a program? Why don't you do these things? So that also helps drive the conversation to policymakers, the ability to offer those programs.
Awesome. So do we have time for a quick last thought from each of them? Yeah? Okay, so let's start with Doug, and we'll go this way.
Last thought. Okay, well, I think that the important thing about this discussion is that if we're going to decarbonize the building sector in these communities, it must actually benefit them. There's not like a clamoring demand for decarbonizing buildings from building owners or tenants. They want to have a safe, comfortable, affordable place to live. That's got to be really like the North Star of whatever we do. We want to engage communities around what they need, not around abstractions about climate. So how do we create a real opportunity for economic wealth improvement, economic development, wealth building, cost reduction, comfort, health, and safety? That's the path for making these investments popular. And we have to make sure that they're not going to increase anybody's in this community's costs. And we have to all keep our it's easy to get wonkified on this stuff, but really it's about improving lives on the ground, and we have to keep our focus on that.
I would say, a couple things. One, urgency. We are behind, and we need to start catching up. I think two, it's how do we leverage the expertise across the value chain to get those programs moving and customers adopting the technologies that are really necessary. And I think third is, and we see this at COP, and it's really fantastic, the power of partnership. We know that the success that we've achieved to date is through partnership, through federal, state, local partnership, through private, public sector partnership with NGOs like NRDC and even smaller community-based organizations. It's leveraging that power of partnership and accelerating the speed at which we get things done.
Building off both those comments, I would add the angle of kind of the multi-objective nature of this work that we talked about earlier being key and central. As we talk about decarbonizing buildings, we have to at the same time be talking about ensuring continued housing affordability, increasing transportation access for those community members that are there, creating the affordability in the places that they need it. These things are all incredibly intertwined, as we talked about, and I think it's easy to even as we all work in these various silos and try to think across each of those spaces. A lot of these are push and pull items that are really challenging to kind of bring together holistically.
Thank you so much again for putting together this panel. I'm really excited to be in conversation with all these great folks and see some people again. The president ran on a platform of three things. One, tackling the climate crisis. Two, rebuilding our country after having the pandemic that devastated so many communities around the country. And then three, making racial justice and equity a centerpiece of his presidency, and doing all three, right? So tackling the climate crisis while also rebuilding communities, while also dismantling structural racism. When we think about the pathways to 1.5, which is the title of this pavilion, there are so many pathways that can rely solely on technology. But if we do not put equity at the center, we are going to lose. We're going to leave communities behind. We're going to have more problems in terms of health. We're going to have more problems in terms of communities getting devastated by storm after storm. So equity has to be at the front of mind as we think about this decarbonization effort. And I would suggest to you that it's not only a duty and responsibility, but that it is imminently within reach. We can do this. It means it's going to get really interesting really fast. But in my mind and in my work and in the Secretary of Energy's work, we are centering equity in everything we do because we believe that that's the only pathway to a decarbonized future.
Wow. So thank you all so much. I think we've had so many issues raised. We could keep going, I think, all day talking about these things. Like we're just getting warmed up here. But remembering this, like you're saying, this nexus of decarbonization, equity, and resilience at the same time. If we do only one of those, we make the other two worse. And I really see that as a triangle of North Star, like you were saying. And what gives me hope is people like this at every level of government, in every kind of organization, and people like all of you here doing this thinking and working together. So thank you to my panelists so much for taking your time here at COP, and really honored to be with you. And thank you all for staying with us for 90 minutes and hanging out.